Today was gonna be the day they were.
Will it be morning glory for Oasis?
Let's all meet up in the year 2000.
A pulp in a different class. With stiff competition from the great and the good of contemporary British music, it could be a night of surprises.
I'm shaking like a leaf on a tree.
The 1996 Album of the Year for the Mercury Music Prize. Tonight, 11:15, BBC Two.
We've got it taped now on BBC Two.
If you look out the window, you can see the leaves are now beginning to fall, and it's the week before Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. For me, I've come back home from holiday. I've been in Spain, and I'll show you some things. I mean, I've come back home to my ticket to let me in to my synagogue service. Would you believe this? It's because so many people go to synagogue around the Jewish New Year. And it symbolises renewal of one's own personal relationship with God. You're amongst a whole batch of other people, but you're also alone, and you're part of a flock that passes through God's doorway to be judged. And there's the shofar, which is blown in the synagogue, which everybody who's Jewish is supposed to hear, and represents the cry of the Jewish soul to God. It's a beautiful plate. So pleased I brought that back. And this is a card that a friend of mine sent me. It means Shana Tova, which means Happy New Year.
This is BBC Two.
The Labour leadership's ideas for reforming the rules on strikes are roundly rejected by postal workers. Would Labour's trade union plans work in practice? Good evening. The contrast couldn't be clearer. On the day, the Shadow Employment Secretary says there ought to be fresh ballots if employers make a significant new offer in a dispute. The postal workers ignore the advice and intensify their action. The dispute in the Royal Mail has now cost it its monopoly for the next 3 months. If trades unionists will take that risk, what chance the Labour leadership's ideas being acceptable? I'll be talking to one Blairite union boss whose members are out on strike later this month. Barry Reamsbottom of the Civil Servants Union. An Islamic court tries a woman for the crime of stealing a dress. Her punishment, whipping. John Simpson is in Somalia, a country with no government, too many warlords and too many guns.
There are signs of a solution emerging, but it's scarcely one we'd feel comfortable with in the West.
We know smoking's risky, yet millions smoke. We know driving's risky, but millions drive. And eating beef? Who knows? What is risk, and how do those whose job it is to warn us formulate one message which will convince everyone? The chairman of the committee which advises the government on the risks of BSE tries to explain. And the story of how Britain secretly spent £500 million on a spy satellite network without Parliament having the chance to discuss it. It's suicidal was the way one boss's spokesman described the decision of the communication workers to intensify their industrial action. There'll be 2 more 24-hour strikes the weekend after next. Tonight, the TUC announced that its General Secretary, John Monks, wants to talk to the communication workers to discuss the strike's wider implications. In Blackpool, Labour's employment spokesman David Blunkett told a fringe meeting at the TUC Congress that he wanted to look at the idea of compulsory ballots if employers make what he called a significant new offer. Other union leaders are muttering angrily about other ideas being discussed by the leadership. Stephen Emerson reports.
Harmony at the TUC. Under the gold of the Winter Gardens, delegates this morning listened to a string quartet. and the noise is off. Labour's noise is off. They'd learned that the party, their party, was mooting new union policy, beefing up ACAS, tightening balloting before, and more important, during disputes, breeding some union mistrust. And into a charged atmosphere, the Labour leader. Discord? What discord?
All you guys always want to have this great sort of conflict and the labour and unions and all the rest of it. We are wanting to form the next government. We want that government to succeed. If there are disputes, we want them resolved amicably. We also believe there's a different era of industrial relations that's got to open up, where the politics of conflict is replaced by proper partnership between employers and trade unions.
Labour's employment spokesman arrived to douse the flames. There'd be no new union law, he said. Rather, he was proposing more resort to arbitration and agreeing to outside adjudicators before strikes, but no compulsion. And during strikes, there'd be fresh ballots when employers increased offers. There's no need to do that now.
Not some sort of new programme of legislation, not some attack on the trade unions, but a way in which we can initiate a consultation process on how we can build to resolve disputes before they reach the point when people lose pay by having to take action. Not to withdraw the right of action.
Mooting, reballoting during disputes angered unions. One big union said incandescent was the word when they saw the proposal on a Labour press release. As though on cue, the Communication Workers Union provided a test case. They called 2 more strikes in Royal Mail rather than reballot the strikers over a changed offer.
I think the situation could be turned round if the union were prepared to go out to their members and ballot. We've been pressing for this for some time, and those 160,000 people whose futures are at risk just haven't been given the chance to express their view, and I think that's terrible.
But there are problems. How might reballoting work under Labour? Either unions and employers agreed to it or be compelled.
That can only be achieved in 2 ways. One is by further legislation, because there is no legislation that would require that at the present time, in spite of the current complexity of that legislation. The other is by including it in collective agreements, which would, of course, mean that unions agreed with employers that that provision would operate. Of course, you've got to remember not only that many unions might not agree to such a provision, but also many workers are not covered by collective agreements at all because employers refuse to talk to unions on their behalf.
And who'd decide? Labour's proposals would transform the current low-key role of ACAS.
ACAS has got 2 problems in the proposals. In the first, it would have to decide what a significant improvement in an offer is. I mean, is it a few pence or does it have to be a couple of % on an increase in wages? In the second, it would have to actually adjudicate on public sector settlements. It would have to produce an arbitration decision. That's not something it's been used to doing in the past, and it would be a much more political role for it.
Tonight it was meant to be party time as Mr. Blair dined with union leaders. The row between the two, and it is a row, is as much about mood and tone as detailed proposals, about redefining the party-union relationship. Mr. Blair acting as he means to if he's Prime Minister. Tonight, the Labour-Union relationship is much more difficult than it was. Whatever the words, union trust of Labour's intentions is diminishing. They sup with longer spoons, though the knives remain solely for eating good food, just about.
Well, we're joined now from the TUC by one of the big union leaders, Barry Reamsbottom of the Civil Servants Union and the CPSA with 125,000 members. Have these visits to Blackpool by Tony Blair and David Blunkett been helpful, Mr. Reamsbottom?
Of course, they're always helpful. It's helpful to be able to sit down in a reasonably calm atmosphere, if the people in the media will allow it to be reasonably calm, and discuss with the potential future Prime Minister and the potential future Employment Secretary how we resolve problems of strikes in the public sector. I have no problem with that.
Why has your General Secretary of the TUC, John Monks, said that today's confused statements on the serious issue of avoiding and resolving industrial disputes takes us backwards, not forwards?
Well, that certainly wouldn't be my view, and I haven't had a chance to discuss that with John today. I've certainly been discussing with David Blunkett his article in the Evening Standard, which has sparked this row, and he certainly didn't sound to me, as we sat down to dine with Tony Blair this evening, as a man who was trying to rattle sabres at us.
Right.
very conciliatory.
Let's just look at a couple of those David Blunkett ideas. Firstly, the idea that any, what he calls significant new offers by employers be put to ballot. Have you got any idea what he means by significant?
Well, it's the case in many disputes that it's always a moving picture. The minute you get into a dispute with an employer, things change. Now an employer will come up with a better offer, and as I understand, what's being mooted here is that it would be compulsory for a union to then ballot if they got a significant improvement. But therein lies the difficulty. Who judges what's the significant improvement? But David Blunkett's made it very clear in his article, and he made it very clear in the discussion I had with him earlier this evening, that this is up for discussion. This is not a firm proposal, and therefore it seems to me a great fuss and row is being created here, when really all that I think we're being asked to do is to sit down and see if there's a way around this intractable problems that we get with strikes in the public sector. My members are out on strike, and it will be their 4th day's strike on September the 23rd over an issue of their security in job centres. I don't want to be out on strike. Our members don't want to be losing pay in this way. We want to continue providing service. Now, if there's a better way, which isn't available because the odds are so stacked against unions at the moment with the current legislation, then I'm happy to sit down with the David Blunketts, the Tony Blairs, and see if we can thrash out that better way.
And you're very happy to do it on the basis of articles in the Evening Standard, are you? That's a perfectly reasonable way to go about having these discussions.
Come off it, Jeremy. I mean, since when was there something wrong with politicians floating ideas, flying kites in articles in newspapers? What really matters is the discussions, the proper discussions that will be had with people who operate in this area to see what kind of laws we do require, so there's a level playing field.
In the light of what you've said about your own members' dispute, you'd favour binding arbitration, would you?
No, I didn't say that. Binding arbitration...
Because that's another of his ideas.
That's right, but you had me saying I was in favour of that. I didn't say that. Again,
oh, you're against that as well?
No, I didn't say I was... Well, perhaps if you let me tell you, I'll tell you what I'm in favour of and what I'm against. I'm prepared to look at the possibility of binding arbitration. I think there are problems with it. I suspect one of our greatest allies, if you're talking about strikes over public sector pay, would be a future Labour Chancellor, Gordon Brown. I doubt if he would be willing to hand over to a board of academics, which is essentially what happens with arbitration, £2 billion worth of public sector pay.
OK, Barry Reamsbottom, thanks very much for joining us. Thank you. The United Nations is in the midst of an emergency appeal for aid to Somalia. $12 million is needed in emergency food supplies. Since the dictator Said Barre fled the country in 1991, Somalia has suffered the double misery of civil war and famine. The American-led United Nations invasion aimed to restore peace, but quickly failed, and now there is simply no government. The country's just a mosaic of clans and sub-clans led by warlords. The capital, Mogadishu, is home to the greatest of these warlords. The northern part of the city is run by Ali Mahdi, a former civil servant, the south by his rival Hussein Aidid. John Simpson has been to the divided city.
The southwestern outskirts of Mogadishu. It's first light. The locals are already up and about. Under the thorn tree is parked the main weapon of the conflict, a so-called technical with a large anti-tank gun mounted on it. The technical has a crew of 6. One of them, still asleep under his blanket to keep the flies off, is known to the others as Bitter Harry. His first conscious action of the day is to grab his gun. Bitter Harry gets his English nickname from some legendary Mogadishu liar. He's a bit of a boaster, a line shooter, but he's a genuine enough fighter, all right. He's still only 18, and he's been a gunman for 5 years. How did you actually start? How do you become a militiaman?
I joined because everyone had guns. I wanted one too.
Was it really perhaps because of your friends? Were they all joining the same unit?
Most of the teenagers took up guns. I had plenty of enemies, and I wanted to get rid of a few of them.
Bitter Harry and the rest of the Technical's crew head off for their day's work. The position they're making for is the most dangerous one in Mogadishu, the so-called Green Line between the warring factions. Bitter Harry lost 2 brothers in the fighting against the Americans and the United Nations near here. He's apparently killed plenty of people, all of them Somalis rather than foreign soldiers. Characteristically, though, he lies about it to us. Have you ever killed anybody?
Yes, I have killed, but I didn't kill my fellow Somalis. I have killed unbelievers from the United Nations.
What did you feel when you killed them?
I didn't feel anything. I felt normal when I was doing the killing.
As they patrol the Green Line, Bitter Harry and the others are all chewing the drug known as gut. The Americans used to say that when Somalis chewed gut, it made them go crazy. Tell me what you think about chewing gut.
That's not true. When we chew gut, we get a feeling of extra activity and mental awareness.
It was very dangerous here, so close to the positions of the other side in this fierce confrontation. At this point, our camera crew and translator were taken prisoner and were lucky to escape with their lives. South Mogadishu is full of gunmen like Bitter Harry. It's a tense, violent, dangerous place where the high-velocity rifle is the only law. An AK-47 is a license to kill and steal. The militiamen are subject to a kind of discipline, but it's the discipline of the gun. Just about everything in the south of the city has been trashed. This is Mogadishu International Airport, close to the centre of town. Once it was the usual third world showpiece. Now it's just another frontline position. At the far end of the runway, a graveyard for the MiG jet fighters of the Ancien Regime. The slogans were plastered all over them by American troops 3 years ago, before their undignified withdrawal. The effect nowadays is distinctly melancholy. The commander at the airport, Mumin Hassan Ali, showed me around. He, like Bitter Harry, belongs to the ID'd faction, which controls South Mogadishu. For him, that's the legitimate government, and the opposing faction, which controls the far end of the runway, are merely bandits. They no doubt feel the same about him.
There is no enemy. There are just bandits over there. They don't want to capture the airport. They just want to keep it closed so that it can't be used.
The commander knows the airport terminal well. He ought to. He used to manage the gift shop in the departures lounge before the Civil War.
This is a bludgeon. In Somalia, we don't use these anymore, but the Americans liked them as souvenirs. I used to sell them for $15 each.